Ready or not, here we come. All right, before I get going, mic sound okay out there? Outstanding. I heard no response, so that must mean the microphone is working. Well, good morning, class. Good morning. Numbers are down a little bit from usual. I'm guessing people are serving mom breakfast in bed today, maybe. But some of the really great moms, are here for Bible study today, and proud of you. I'm proud of you. Hey, we are in week 44 of our study of the book of Acts, and knowing that we took a few weeks off for various things like Easter Sunday, we had a little fellowship week, whatever. I was trying to think back in my memory. I think we started this class like Pentecost or the week after Pentecost last year. Yeah. And so I think we're going to finish pretty darn close to the anniversary of starting the class, which is pretty cool, I think. I was just looking ahead, next week we're going to celebrate Ascension Sunday, and don't you know the book begins with the Ascension. I'm actually going to be preaching from Acts chapter 1 next week, so I don't know, it's kind of cool, kind of fun. I think I'm going to make it a goal to roll through a lot of the book today. We have 2 chapters to go. Are we going to finish today? Doubt it. But I think by the end of next week we should be done. So, quick summary. I was watching our family all together watched The Princess Bride for the first time last night. I've seen it a bazillion times, my wife too, but my son, this was his first time to see it. And there's this moment where the 3 kind of main heroes of the thing are up on a wall, and the one character says to the other one, "Let me explain." "No, there is too much. Let me sum up." So, I'd like to explain to you what's going on in the book so far, but there's too much, so let me sum up. In the book of Acts, if you've seen the movie, you know that was a really good impression. All right, in the book of Acts, we've been following along with the life of the church. We've been following along with the life of God's people. It begins with Jesus just as he's about to ascend into heaven. And he leaves his disciples with the instructions that say, "Wait for me here until you receive power from on high. And when you do, you will become my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth," right? And so, lo and behold, that's exactly what happens. 10 days later, the Holy Spirit comes upon them in power. They begin to preach the gospel, and the Holy Spirit breaks through the language barriers that people have, so everybody's hearing the gospel being spoken to them in their own native tongue. People are hearing about this resurrection of Jesus and coming to faith, and it's an amazing thing. Now, from there, the disciples start baptizing people. They get a few thousand people on that first day, and they start living in community with each other, which probably as Jewish people they already did, but it takes on a new character, right? So now they are putting the words of Jesus into action. They're loving their neighbor. They're loving their enemy. They are sharing what they have with those who don't have. They are caring for widows and orphans. They are growing in selflessness. And this other thing Jesus said to his disciples back when he was doing his preaching and teaching ministry, he said to them, "You will do these things you've seen me do, and even greater things than these." Well, in the book of Acts, we actually see that starting to happen. It starts off with the miraculous healing of a paralytic. Peter and John have no money, but what they do have is the Holy Spirit. And for any struggling ministry, any modest-sized ministry, let this be a good reminder. Peter and John go to the temple to pray. They say, "We don't have money, but we do have the Holy Spirit." And lo and behold, miraculous things happen. And it amplifies their testimony far more than, having some money in their pocket. Well, as the Christian church is picking up steam, the disciples will not stop talking about this Jesus who was crucified, but then who rose from the dead and made an appearance to, hundreds of people. Well, you may remember that the people who had him crucified, when the guards came and said, he's not dead anymore, he got up out of the grave. They gave some hush money to them and said, tell people that the body is stolen. Because, and here's where we get into that sort of politics of the book. There are different factions within the Jewish faith during the time of the Bible. It's also true today, but the factions aren't necessarily all the same. There were Pharisees and Sadducees being the two main branches. Pharisees embraced the whole of the Old Testament. They believed in the miraculous works of God. They believed in the resurrection. They believed in angels. They believed in spirits. They believed in all of the supernatural things. Sadducees actually don't. They only take the first 5 books of the Bible as being the Word of God. Their focus is strictly on obedience to the law. Live the best life you can. Die, leaving behind a good legacy, but you die and that's it. They didn't believe in a resurrection. They didn't believe in angels. They didn't believe in any of that stuff, right? Well, this is a problem when somebody comes back to life. And it's a problem when the disciples are doing miracles and supernatural things. So Sadducees are the main antagonists throughout a lot of this book. And so they start trying to hush up the disciples, first by giving them a stern talking to, then by arresting them, but they won't stay in jail because angels break them out and, Then they start threatening their physical lives. Stephen is the first Christian martyr. He is stoned to death just because he preached Christ and wouldn't stop. There's a group of people there feeling very self-righteous about that act. Amongst them was a Pharisee. So note, this isn't strictly a Sadducee problem. There's a Pharisee amongst them, a young man named Saul, real up-and-comer, bright star. He's going places. After the persecution of after the martyrdom of Stephen, then the persecution ramps up in Jerusalem. They start doing home invasions, arresting people. So it's not just stopping people from worshiping in the synagogue. It's not just from stopping them from preaching in public places. Now they're actually invading people's homes, not allowing them to privately worship Christ either. This leads to a spreading of the Christian church throughout basically all the surrounding areas. We will pick up with Paul. He becomes converted to the faith by a miraculous appearance of Jesus. You guys know this stuff. Let's skip ahead a lot. So Paul travels around a lot. He doesn't come back to Jerusalem very much, once early on in his career. And then toward the end of his preaching ministry, he comes back to Jerusalem. That's when he gets arrested. There's a mob. There's a riot that breaks out. The Roman officials there don't know what to do with him because they don't know what he did. But they can't have a riot either because Caesar, which, by the way, anybody remember who is Caesar right now? Nero, yeah. If you know anything about Nero, he's basically all the things you think about modern politicians. That's pretty much it. So anyway, the centurions don't want Caesar to find out about what's going on, so they keep Paul back in the barracks. So he's sort of under arrest, sort of. He's in, what do they call it? Protective custody. He's in protective custody, right? And he's going to send him over to Caesarea so he can make it somebody else's problem. And there are some Jewish dissenters who hear about this, and they plan to ambush the escort on the road. So there's 40 men who take a vow to not eat or drink anything until they've killed Paul. Well, Paul's nephew hears about this, and he tells Paul, and Paul says, well, go tell the captain of the guard. Captain of the guard says, oh, well, we can't have that, can we? So this big, giant military escort escorts Paul from Jerusalem to Caesarea. And, the 40 guys don't stand a chance against the 200 guys on horseback with armor and spears and stuff, right? So plot failed. He's in Caesarea, and there he's under the is it Festus first and then Felix? I always get it backwards. So he goes there, and I'm just going to go for it. I think it's Festus. Festus knows a bit about Christianity, and he's interested. He wants to hear what Paul has to say. Nobody has any real charges against him. But also, he just, keeps Paul around, and he lets him have access to his friends and stuff because he's waiting for Paul to finally pony up a bribe to let him go, which Paul never does. And so after a while, Festus gets rotated out, Felix gets rotated in, right? So there's sort of a changing of the local government. And when Felix gets in, he's like, what are you doing here? I don't understand what's going on here. And Paul's like, well, I just preached Jesus. And so he calls for Herod, the king of the Jews. I'm going to air quotes that. He was officially, politically the king of the Jews, but we all know who the real king of the Jews is. All right, so he calls Herod Agrippa. Herod comes, and he gets his shot at examining Paul. And Paul does everything he can to present the gospel to Herod. And he's like, we're Jewish. We believe in the scriptures. We believe in the resurrection. We believe in the prophets. That's why I'm on trial today. I've seen fulfilled in the life of Jesus the things the prophets said. And if you believe it too, then you could be saved. And Herod's like, bro, you've been with me for 5 minutes. You think I'm going to become a Christian? But when you got your shot, you got to shoot your shot, right? So that's what happened. He doesn't get set free. They're debating what to do with him. And at the end of the thing, Paul says, look, I'm a Roman citizen. I want to be heard by Caesar. After he says that, they're like, well, now we got to, because he's a Roman citizen. But if he hadn't said that, we could have cut him loose. We could have set him free. Now, that probably would not have been beneficial to Paul for 2 reasons. Number one, they were going to ship him back to Jerusalem, which is just, as far as he's concerned, it's just a nest of vipers waiting to get him. So that's not great. But on the other hand, he gets to go to Rome, a place that's on his heart, a place with believers he hasn't got to meet yet, and this is quite significant, a place with people who don't believe yet that he's going to get to spend time with. And we learn from some of the epistles he writes in prison. We won't get there in the book because the book ends before, it's outside the scope of the book. But the guards and the people who are charged with, watching over him, they start coming to faith, right? He witnesses to these people on the daily basis, and they start coming to faith, So I think as far as Paul's concerned, he's actually right where he wants to be. Whereas, I had it backwards. There's Felix first and then Festus. So Agrippa and I just saw it. Agrippa and Festus are talking about wow, what a shame. He could have been free. I don't think he wants to be free. I think he's right where he wants to be. That brings us up to Acts 27. Whew. Let's go. Acts 27. So the last thing was Paul appealed to Caesar, and they said he could have been set free if he'd not appealed to Caesar. So verse 1. When it was decided that we should set, why is it we, by the way? Why is he talking about we? Who is the writer of this book? Luke. And where is Luke? Geographically right now, where is Luke? He's with Paul. Right? It's we because he's along for the journey. Okay. When it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship from Adramyttium, did I say it right? You don't know and you don't care. Remember this next time you have to read in church. Nobody cares if you said it right. All right. To Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. Let's pause there for a moment. Julius treats Paul kindly. Do you think he's in the practice of treating prisoners kindly? Probably not. Why do you suppose he would treat Paul with kindness? Roman citizen? Maybe. Could be because he's a citizen. I think there's a simpler answer. Okay. The Holy Spirit, yeah, probably so. But there's an example we see repeated throughout the life of Paul, which is he's nice to people. He is nice to his captors. He's nice to the guards. He's not, when I think about Paul, I tend to think of him as being like very fiery and very, stiff back, but no, when you read through Acts, he's got a lot of gentleness. He's not a pushover. He stands his ground on what he believes. He stands his ground on that he's going to speak the truth, but he does it all with gentleness. He does it all with, even if you look at how he addressed Agrippa last chapter, he could have been like, you should have abdicated the throne to the real king, or whatever. He could have been, but he doesn't do any of that. He's kind and respectful. And so I don't think he comports himself much like a normal prisoner. I think he actually is just a decent man. And so that inclines Aristarchus probably to, or not Aristarchus, Julius to give him some latitude. All right, so he gets to meet with his friends and be cared for. And they put out to sea from there. We sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against it. Some Bible study teachers would bust out maps and draw arrows and stuff and show you where all this stuff is. And that's interesting, but we're not going to spend time on that. And when we sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. Cnidus? And as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. I don't know if you guys are gleaning all the deep theology embedded in this paragraph, but as far as I can tell, it's just slow going because the weather's bad, right? Now, there might be a reason for that. We'll see. Since much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, "Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there, on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. All right, just real quickly, right now, who's in charge? Yeah, I would say the centurion's in charge, probably. He's making the calls, but who's he listening to? Well, he's listening to the pilot, right? This makes sense. If you are, if you're making a journey at sea, you want to pay attention to the people who know something about sailing, right? Paul's a theologian. And let me tell you something, theologians know nothing about the world, right? They are the least practical people you will meet. A kid. But yeah, perfectly reasonable thing that Julius would say, I don't know, what do you think, Captain? And Captain says, it won't be good to stay here. This place is not a suitable place for us to winter. We got to push on. So right for now, centurion's in charge, and the captain is kind of right under that. Verse 13. Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind, called a nor'easter, struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. All right, so now they no longer are in control of the boat. They're just at the mercy of the winds, okay? Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. Just a little tip to you. If ever you're reading a story about people who are on a ship and they start jettisoning the cargo, that's a bad sign, right? Seafaring is expensive business, right? And especially in the ancient, especially in the ancient world, but it's true even today. If a ship was going somewhere, they could take passengers, great, but most of these things aren't like passenger ships. It's not like they're on a cruise. The only way that this makes sense is there's some import-export stuff going on. So they've got cargo, they need to move, they need to get it from point A to point B, pick up some other stuff. This is how they make their money, right? And the transport, probably especially the transport of prisoners, is not really highly profitable, right? This ship might even be compelled to do it in the same way that a Roman could compel somebody to carry their bag for a mile. A soldier could say, hey, walk with me a mile and carry my stuff. And if he does that to a Christian's supposed to walk an extra mile, right? That's what Jesus was talking about. So this ship might have been compelled. They're going the right way, and the guard might have said, look, you're taking us too. So when they start throwing the cargo over, the journey is now going to be a loss, right? But what else is held in the cargo? Not just trade goods. What else? Food, yeah. So at the point that they start dumping cargo, things are bad. That's it's not a last resort, but it's pretty low on the list of things you want to do. All right. And when on the third day, while we're at this, can you off the top of your head think of any other biblical story where a ship is tossed by storms and they start dumping cargo? I saw your mouth move. Jonah, yeah. If this story calls to mind Jonah, good. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Tackle's like the rigging stuff that makes the boat work. When neither the sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me. Told you so. And not have set sail from Crete. and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship, and he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told, but we must run aground on some island. We've thrown the cargo overboard. We've thrown the tackle overboard. But it's fine. Paul says we're going to be okay because God talked to him. But actually, God did talk to him. Right? When the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little farther, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms, right? So it's getting more shallow. And fearing they might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, they had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under the pretense of laying out anchors from the bow. Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. As the day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength. For not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you. When he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of all. He broke it and began to eat. Then they all were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. Okay. So let's track a few things here. It is clear that of all the stuff they threw into the sea, they hadn't thrown all the food in, right? And I don't know if this is like a sailing protocol or something, right? Because like if you get lost at sea or if you get shipwrecked somewhere, your odds of survival go up if you've got some food at least, right? So they might have been holding some back. But they dumped a lot of stuff too, including the tackle. So I read some commentaries about this that said, that they hadn't eaten for 14 days, but that wasn't because they didn't have enough food to go around. It's because, they were busy or they were so seasick or whatever. Could be. I think it's very likely that they are at least on reduced rations, right? So they haven't had a proper meal, like they're snacking. I think that might be it. I think it also could be that they really were abstaining from eating because they were saving their stores for, whatever. But Paul, he's confident that they're getting through this, right? So he sits, he takes some bread, he blesses it, breaks it. Does this call anything to mind for you? The Last Supper? What else? Certainly this is, what we see Jesus do at the Last Supper, but actually we even see him do it earlier than this at the feeding of the 5,000. Right? Now, nothing in the text says that they did a miracle of multiplication, where like a little food becomes a lot of food. Nothing in the text says that explicitly, so I'm not going to make that claim. But I would say there's enough food to go around because they all eat their fill, right? Isn't that what it says? And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. So they were obviously full enough that they couldn't eat anymore because they threw the rest into the sea. Now, here is something that I want to point out to you. One of the big accusations leveled at Jesus. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Note that Paul, on the ship, sits down, takes the bread, blesses it, breaks it, and invites these 270-something people to eat with him. This is a sign of community, right? Who's on this ship right now? Who are these people that are sitting down to eat with him? We got sailors, okay? Whom else is on the ship? Prisoners, right? Clearly sinners. Who else? If there's prisoners, there's also the guards, who are Roman, right? Sinners, Gentiles. Paul unabashedly sits down, shares table with them. And he positions himself like he's the host of the meal, right? This prisoner is supposed to be all, under lock and key, and yet he comes out as if he's, and who's in charge now? Yeah. And they all sit down and they share a meal. And they're so confident that they're going to be rescued that they hold nothing back. When they finish the meal, they pitch the rest into the sea. Lighten the ship. Let's get up off these rocks. Now, when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. Oh, no, I should back up a little bit, because I skipped over this too, because I was asking that question, who's in charge, right? They're all making their preparations to get to land. And did you notice there was a little group of sailors who were like, we got to get off the ship. And so they start lowering like the life raft down into the dinghy. Like they start lowering that into the water, pretending they're dropping anchor. And Paul catches it, and he says to the guards, you have to stop them. If they get off the boat, you will not survive. So they cut the ropes. So now there's no boat. Who's in charge? Paul's in charge. Why is Paul in charge? I think it has a lot to do with the same reason that Jonah's in charge. Everybody tried everything they could, and they're freaking out. But you know who's not freaking out? Paul. Jonah. When Jonah faces up to it, he walks up, he's like, yeah, it's me. It's my God's doing it, and here's what you got to do. When we read about a peace that passes understanding, I think sometimes we get real flowery about what we think that means. But if you watch these Christians in a crisis, it's not really flowery. They just walk with confidence into the situation, saying, God's got this under control. I was listening to God. Here's what he had to say. I remember one other time in the Bible that they're on a ship and things are going bananas. And everybody's worried but one guy. You know who that one guy was? Jesus. He stands up and he rebukes the seas. All right, so they're planning, if possible, to run ashore. Verse 40. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on planks or pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. All right. Ship breaks up. Everybody's got to abandon the ship. What's the protocol? What do the soldiers want to do? Why do they want to kill the prisoners? If they escape, then they're in trouble. I want you to think back to when Paul is in prison. And I'm sorry, to when it was Paul and Silas, right? When they were in prison, remember, and they're singing all the way through the night, and then all the chains fall off and the doors fly open. What is the guard going to do right away? He's going to kill himself. Because he knows that if the prisoners escape, something bad is waiting for him, right? Something worse than falling on his own sword. Well, in this case, there's enough guards to go around. They think they can just kill the prisoners, and at least they can maybe get off a little lighter. So, yeah, fine. But you remember what happened when Paul and Silas were in jail, and the chains fall off and the doors swing open? Where did all the prisoners go? They all stayed. They all stayed. The same thing is happening here, right? The guards are about to kill everybody, but the captain of the guard, who has come to recognize something about Paul, he doesn't want Paul to die. So for the sake of Paul, he spares all of them. He could have just said, that's fine, just leave the bald one, right? But he didn't do that. That peace that Paul had is becoming contagious in some sense, right? Paul says, we're all going to get out of this alive. That's what Paul said. He said, God told me that none of us are going to die. So when the guards start saying, well, we got to kill these people, the centurion's like, no. We were told everybody lives. If everybody lives, then they live. But if everybody lives, then you live. You know, the way the natural sinful man works, we're often very reactive, right? We sense something bad is going on, and then we flail around and we do something desperate to try and escape or save ourselves, right? But the Spirit of God's bringing peace. It's acting against that natural inclination to do desperate things to save yourselves. This centurion is starting to believe in the promises of God. Not that he heard them from God, he heard them from Paul. All right, so they make a plan. They say, all right, well, everybody, abandon ship. If you can swim, swim. If not, grab some flotsam. Is that the right term? Floating bits of the ship. Grab some debris, and then we're just going to get everybody to shore. And they do. Do we want to crack open the next chapter with only like 5 minutes to go, or should we wrap up here? Yeah. Maybe maybe we'll just finish here. So just a couple things to kind of hang a sign on before we close. The way that Paul has comported himself, the way that he's been calm under pressure, the way that he's been listening to what God has to say, and sharing the message that he's heard from God. All these things have added up to saving lives. Also worth noting, by the way, sometimes we get really panicky about, well, what if I missed what God said, right? Maybe you're at a big decision, maybe you're having a personal crisis, and you think you made the wrong choice. Well, actually, we read that in the story here today. Paul tells them, look, we should not leave. But they listen to worldly wisdom instead of godly wisdom. And that's just where they were at in life right now, Well, there's a consequence to that, but it's not irredeemable. They lost money, they lost the ship, and yet God is coming behind, sparing lives, and you'll notice, at least in the centurion, and maybe more broadly, he's starting to grow a faith. All right, we'll stop there. Next week, chapter 28, we're going to do it. Don, next week, we're going to finish. I love it. All right, thanks. We got church coming up in about 12 minutes, so stick around.